Welcome back. So today I want to talk about perspectives, one of the great secrets of the universe, if you will. What are perspectives? Perspectives are essentially anything and everything. What do I mean? Like anything that you experience in your life, you experience through the lens of your own perspective, of how you view the world, how you think the world works. And your opinions, your experiences in general, your skill set, your mindset, your knowledge base, anything really. So, why am I saying that perspectives are essentially one of the great secrets? It's because it's about learning to switch or shift your perspective, to not hold on to your own perspective all the time. So for example, one of the reasons we're having trouble letting go, say for example, letting go of a loved one, or letting go of a relationship, or letting go of a loss, it's because we kind of cannot stand how this happened to us. So the perspective in this sense is us. It's how we experienced it, what we experienced. And if we were able to move forward in time, now all of a sudden, say 10 years later, all of a sudden you don't even remember that occurrence, that thing that put you down so much. Or maybe you remember it, but it doesn't have the same emotional effect on you anymore. Because over time, you learn to move on. You learn to shift your perspective to something new. Your life moved on. Your life happened. Anything that you did over that time period happened, and it helped you shift your perspective. Now, why is it so important to be able to shift perspectives at will? It's because it makes the time it takes for you to be able to move on, in a sense, from this to this. It shrinks it down, because now you can choose how you experience something, what you experience, and how you react to it, how it affects you. Now you're able to see other perspectives more quickly, sooner than before. If you are, for example, in the military, now your comrade's perspectives is essentially your perspective, and the way you've been taught to experience the world and see the world has been influenced by the military, and so your perspective has been shifted to have that type of view in that moment. But you can also shift from there. Some things might be very useful if you have a specific perspective, something that you've learned, some skill you acquired, or some knowledge you acquired. But you have to understand that in order for yourself to be more free, you have to be able to shift your perspective quickly and with ease whenever needed. Because not being able to shift your perspective, holding on to your one point of view, will not only create some conflict in your life, it'll create conflict inside of you. And that is something that we can avoid if we learn to shift perspectives, if we learn to take the viewpoint of another, to take the viewpoint of another idea, of another person, of another concept, and not just intellectually see it, but experience it. Be really clear on what that viewpoint is and why it is so. For example, let's say someone did something wrong to you and you're upset. You could say, well, my perspective is correct. They actually did something wrong, and let's pretend for a moment that you're right. But they did not necessarily intend to do something wrong, so they had a specific perspective. If you learn to see their perspective, you can at least experience a form of empathy, or have the idea of why they did what they did. And then you understand, well, if I were in their shoes, with their viewpoints, with their perspectives, I might have done the same. So even though they're wrong, at least now you understand why what happened happened. And therefore, you'll have a different way of reacting to it. And when you can react differently, well, life gets easier. So I recommend to you to frequently in your life, in your daily life, for example, look at ways of how you can change perspectives or observe what your perspective is. Why did you react the way that you did? Why did you think what you thought? Why did you say what you said? Learn to observe yourself. Become aware of your own perspectives. Become aware of how you think, behave, and what kind of triggers are in your life that actually make you act a certain way or say or think things the way you do. So become an observer of yourself. Become an observer of others and try to see everything through their lens. Why did that person do this or that? Let's say, for example, you're in the car and someone cuts you off and you're going completely berserk, completely mad. Well, maybe that person is on their way, and it's a classic example, it's almost cliche. Maybe that person was on their way to the hospital because of an emergency. You never know. So just going berserk and mad because 99 out of 100 times this is someone that is just maybe annoying or did something because they're a little egotistical or whatever you want to judge it, don't judge it. Just think of yourself. You have done the same thing before. Now we're getting into a little bit of a different topic, which is judgment. But think of it as yourself. You've done the same thing before yourself. You have thought the same thought or a similar thought in a similar or completely different situation before. Why? Well, we all have very similar kind of patterns that happen that trigger us. Everybody has different triggers. That's why everybody's different. But if you break it down to certain specifics, these things start to look very similar. So the surface level that looks completely different and might be completely different sometimes starts to narrow down to become a little bit more similar. So in that sense, being able to shift your perspective and see how you might have done the same thing in the same situation. Or what about, like I said earlier, when you lose someone or you're getting out of a relationship, it takes time to heal. It takes time to process everything. And if you look at the first state where, well, it happened and right now the pain is great and it doesn't feel good, then the end state, maybe years later, you don't feel it anymore. You don't feel pain. You don't feel an intense emotion in that sense anymore because you've shifted perspectives. So think about how that shift happened and what that shift actually did. Let's take the example that I gave of losing a loved one. Years later, you might still think of that person, but you don't think with the same emotional pain anymore. You start thinking about them and smile. Oh, that was a nice situation that we had there, and this one just reminded me of that person. So the way you think about the whole situation has completely changed. What is the perspective change in that sense? And where in your life have you already experienced something like that? How did you, over time, learn to see it differently? Well, one of the things is that over time, you learned to not just zoom in on this one little specific thing. You start to zoom out and you see a bigger picture. And whenever something emotionally intense happens, what happens is usually we start to zoom in and we start to only see like a very narrow little thing. But changing perspectives then allows us to zoom back out and see a bigger picture. And all of a sudden, we don't just see this one little thing anymore, but we see a lot of different things. And when we see a lot of things, now on our minds, there's not just this one thing, there are many things. So we're able to drift off and experience other things, not just this one specific thing. So when we don't shift perspectives, what we do oftentimes is we hold on to one specific view, and we're not even aware that it's this one little narrow zoomed in view where all you do is just look at one tiny little aspect of something in your life. And by tiny, I don't mean it judgmental, where it's nothing, it doesn't mean anything. No, of course it means something. But there are many other things in your life, in your world, that also mean something. So learn to see all of them. Learn to see a wider view and sometimes a narrow view. Sometimes a narrow view is important. So for example, when you always just look at the wide picture, that's also not going to be the most useful thing. Because sometimes it's important to be very focused, very single-minded and looking at just one thing. So in that sense, you have to kind of figure out when it's time for what. But usually what happens with most humans is they tend to zoom in a little bit too much. So therefore, it makes a lot of sense to learn to zoom out, change perspectives into seeing more, seeing different things, looking at different things. If all you ever think about is money, for example, then money will take a big amount of real estate in your brain, and you will see many things in your life through the lens of money. But perhaps you're not looking at some of your relationships as much anymore, because you just judge everything based on value. How much value am I getting back? What am I getting out of this? All these things. But instead, change your perspective and look at a much bigger picture, because, well, sometimes you don't know what you get beforehand. Sometimes you don't know what you get until years later. And I want to make it clear that it's not even about what you get. It's about what you give. But that's another topic. That's a topic for another video that I will make hopefully soon. And for now, I want to thank you for watching. And if you like the video, please give it a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer. Take care.